lobbying the U.S. and having some sort of, classified information that can always be used as a rebuttal for any appeal?
I have no doubt that the embassy in Sri Lanka and Washington, D.C. is probably handing the State Department all the derogatory things that they can imagine. And again, that's one of the very anguishing elements here. If you don't win at the State Department, how do you challenge something where you're not told what the adverse evidence is? I've asked the State Department with the Freedom of Information Act request to give me whatever evidence they have that they would release in the public domain to suggest why there was the listing in the first place. I'm still waiting for a response. But that doesn't mean that we can also try to obtain congressional interest in why is there this listing. And congressmen are cleared for classified information, and they could get documents in executive session, closed session, which would protect the secrecy, but it'd give them an independent eyes to determine what in fact is going on.
Okay. Now to the third piece where you are to bring to justice the U.S. residents or citizens who are in power in Sri Lanka, namely Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Basil Rajapaksa, and
General
Fonseca. What are their actual positions as far as U.S. status is concerned? Are they citizens? Are they alien residents?
Well, Gotabaya, we understand, is a citizen. Basil, I think, is a resident alien. And that's my understanding with regard to General Fonseca. But those elements really are elements that relate to whether you could get the political will to bring the prosecutions. If you just look at the law itself, remember, we're speaking about prosecutions in the United States courts. This is not the International Criminal Court. United States courts. There are certain kinds of crimes which, if committed, trigger United States jurisdiction whether you're a citizen or not. And that would include things like genocide, torture, extrajudicial killings, crimes against humanity. Now, of course, the interest that a country has in bringing a prosecution rises logarithmically if it's their own citizen it's perpetrating this. And especially in the United States, which has made such a strong case for insisting that other countries be very scrupulous in making sure all their citizens avoid terrorism. So if we're going to be the model, well, if you have a suspected terrorist in your midst, why are you shutting your eyes? And so the political will to go forward in the face of these crimes is far greater if you've got resident aliens and a U.S. citizen directly involved. Remember, these kinds of, the theories of criminal liability here, again, they're not novel, but they're command responsibility. That's the same theories that were used to bring Slobodan Milosevic of Serbia before then an international court at The Hague to justice. But the idea is well entrenched in the law, and it's that if an individual, either de jure under the law or in fact, exercises control over subordinates, paramilitary units, soldiers, naval, aircraft, Air Force pilots or otherwise, then if they either knew or had reason to know that there would be a war crime and did nothing, or after the fact they knew the culprit and did nothing, they then are criminally culpable as though they had perpetrated that act. And I think it's probably fairly common knowledge who calls the shots, if you will, on the security front in Sri Lanka. It's just like Molotov in Stalin's days didn't do anything that Stalin told him to do. Those soldiers don't do anything that the Rajapakses don't tell them to do, or General Fonseca. So that is important because it means that in order to prove guilt, you don't have to find necessarily the name of the foot soldier who pulled the trigger. We know that despite, obviously, these numerous crimes, because there's so many, that we can count just from the public record, and the fact that nothing has ever been done to identify, to prosecute, or otherwise these individuals, that the presumption that there seems to be a case of command responsibility for these wrongdoings is very high.
We're going to take some of the calls as well. Before we go for a break, we'll take one quick call maybe. Subramaniam, you're on air.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. I think you seem to know, fully aware of the whole situation of Sri Lanka, and you have spoken the truth. My question is also based on truth. Actually, this problem was not, some people, the present day people think that this problem is LTT and things like that and all that. But it is not so, because it has started soon after independence. It had been going on, and you related that all that. It has been going on for all that murders, genocide, rape of women, denial of education, no jobs, all these things. Not only that, some riots, they broke shops and things like that. Or some of these things are like Hitler's actions in Germany, you know. Something like that, it has taken place. It's because of that the Tamils were driven to ask for a self-government or independent state. But now the problem is, nobody seems to, in US or any place, they don't seem to know what's happening exactly in Sri Lanka. These fellows, these Mahinda Rajapaksa ministers and all these fellows, they come and have contact with the ministers and these places here, and they tell all lies and nothing truth, no truth. But I know you have spoken the truth. Now the thing is, we don't have anybody to go and speak to the ministers in any one of these countries. So the whole thing falls on the Tamils outside Sri Lanka. So now how can we, I'm not talking about defending Tamils, how can we put the truth to these ministers and all these people?
Thank you for that question.
Well, first let me preface a direct answer with the observation, which is implicit in your question, that at the outset, even after there was the denationalization of 1 million Tamils and basically reducing their political clout by 50%, there was a party, the Federal Party, you may recall, was formed, saying even at that early stage they needed statehood. This wasn't going to work. But the Tamils were patient and basically voted that party out of existence. So the Tamils were patient. They tried Gandhian-like protests. They thought maybe they were dealing with the Queen of England instead of the Sinhalese, and they soon discovered that this was not the Queen of England. But how do we then move forward and convey the truth? Really, we need your support. Tamils for Justice needs your financial support that we're asking at these various events. We need your evidence that you can come forward. Don't be frightened, because your fright will only embolden the Rajapakses further. And we need to get your support to say Tamils for Justice is that Tamil diaspora spokesperson you need to look to. They represent us, they express our goals and ambitions, and then we will be able to speak with the authoritativeness and the resources at all levels of government. I will be in Washington, I will be in London, I will be in Ottawa, and making that clear. But remember, truth doesn't win on its own. It needs packaging like other sorts of things. And I don't want to be cynical, but that is to a large degree true. And when you have a country like Sri Lanka that doesn't have 10 million barrels of oil like Saudi Arabia, it doesn't have nuclear ambitions and nuclear weapons like North Korea or Iran, it takes a lot of hard labor to convince and to convey to these elected officials, given their limited time span, how terrible the situation is and how they are dishonoring their own country's goals by not championing a separate statehood referendum. But it's like the Chinese say, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and one of the reasons why I'm here is to try and to get this kind of support from people like you so we will succeed.
Thank you very, very much for that answer. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, more with Attorney Bruce Fein. Welcome back. You're watching Bruce Fein live on TVI. We're talking about Tamil statehood, a referendum on Tamil statehood, and everything else that's going to lead up to it. We can take some of your calls as well. The number to call is 416-593-4940. Now, Mr. Fein, before we go to some calls, I read that back in 2004, your position about LTTE was quite different from your position in 2008.
Well, let me address that issue. 2004, an issue had arisen in U.S. courts as to whether or not the Congress had power under the United States Constitution to create what we might call a foreign terrorist list, and whether that power was consistent with the First Amendment. And I argued that Congress had that authority under the Constitution. That is not what is being addressed now. It's whether